Hi, my name is Ethan, and in this video I want to share with you the basics for getting healthy. Now, health means many different things to many different people, but I like to define it as the ability to do life well. You see, if we are impeded in our health, perhaps in our ability to be able to move, to be able to interact with the world in the way that we want to, then we're going to be restricted from living the fullest life possible. And that's not fun for anybody. So I want to share with you the basics and some tips and tricks and areas that you can look into in your life that will help you on your journey to becoming the healthiest and happiest version of you. So let's get stuck in. Now, this video is for people who are at the start of their health journey, perhaps in the first year or two of really starting to understand the importance of things like exercise and diet, but also that you realise that there's a mindset that comes with a healthy lifestyle. It's a becoming of a better version of you. And I feel like that is something that is missed out a lot in the discussion around fitness, exercise and health, is actually our mindset and our self-image. So we'll cover that in today's video too. So I like to start with exercise because I think it's probably one of the most fundamental things you can do to improve your health and general well-being. And I like to split exercise up into three different categories. There are more than this, but this to me is the simplest and the most basic way to understand what we can do with our bodies. So first up, you've got resistance, some form of putting your body in a situation where it's got to move some weight or move a person perhaps. So things like lifting weights in the gym or contact sports such as rugby or American football, these could be classed as some form of resistance training. You're putting your body as a force against something. And that can help to build muscle, to develop strength, and just generally is really good for your musculoskeletal system. So we can also then do some calisthenics in here as well. And that's another of my favourites, which is lifting our own body weight. So that can be things like push-ups and pull-ups, body weight squats, stuff like that. All of that is a form of moving our body against resistance, moving our body against gravity. And it really, really can benefit us over the long run. We then have cardiovascular training. Now this can look like just going for a gentle walk, but also things like running, swimming, cycling, rowing. All of those are forms of cardiovascular exercise. Something that gets our heart rate up, gets the blood flowing a bit, gets us moving, and is for a longer duration. So whilst, if you're lifting weights, you're probably not going to be in the gym for much more than an hour at a time. And those bursts of energy that you're putting into, say, lifting, doing a bicep curl, you do a short set and it maybe takes 30 seconds to a minute. Whereas in cardiovascular training, you're doing a consistent activity for half an hour, 2 hours at a time. And then another area is flexibility, and this is one that I feel is often missed as well in the general sphere of health. And it's flexibility, how we can move our bodies and what range of motion is accessible to us. After several years of lifting weights in the gym, I found that my flexibility actually went down. I really struggled to touch my toes, my hips, my legs and my back were really, really tight all of the time. And it wasn't until I started implementing some flexibility training into my general health and wellness program that I really started to feel like I could move again. And things like yoga or Pilates and stretching all fit well into this category. So I believe with exercise that everyone should be doing some form of exercise. And if you could do all three of these even if it's one session of each per week, you are going to feel so much better in yourself. And often, if the balance of these is out, if you only do resistance training, you never do cardio and you never do flexibility work, then you see what we often see with, like big bodybuilders, where they get out of breath going up a flight of stairs, and they can't really move their bodies because they're just a massive human. But it's because they've missed out doing some cardio and some flexibility training along the way. They've just focused on building muscle. So a good balanced mix of all of these three, I think, is really, really important. Now, onto diet. You see, there are three main categories I like to cover with diet. The first of those is our calorie intake. And our calorie intake is really just, the amount of food and alcohol that we're putting into our body, perhaps sugary drinks as well, are going to contribute to, an overall amount of calories that you are consuming in a day, in a week, in a month. Each of us has a baseline amount of calories that we can comfortably eat in a day that will maintain our current body weight. So this will be based on things like your age, your height, your sex, and also your current weight as well. You'll have a kind of a baseline rate that your body needs just to sustain itself. And then when you add exercise on top of that, if you're burning some calories away with exercise, then your baseline is going to increase to a point where it needs to keep your body weight the same to maintain yourself. So that may look like about, say, 2,500 calories for a fairly average sized man, or a bit lower for women. And that's your baseline. But then if you're looking to, say, gain weight, you want to bulk up, you want to put on some size in the gym, you're going to have to eat in excess of that baseline of calories. And if you want to lose weight, you're going to have to eat under it. So what I would recommend to find out your kind of general baseline is to use an app on the internet called Calorie Calculator. And in there, you can put in those details, your height, your weight, your size. And from that, it's going to generate an estimate of what your calorie intake is required to either maintain, increase, or decrease. And you can then, attune that to your goal. If you're looking to lose weight, and you see that, okay, my calorie goal is maybe to eat 2,000 calories a day to lose half a pound per week. You've got a baseline, you've got a starting point, that you can go from. And if you're then adding exercise and things like that into it as well, it's going to give you a really holistic picture of where you need to be. And from that, you can then start to count your calories. I don't recommend doing this for, forever, but doing it for a week or two, just to get an idea of kind of what your general habits are, what you're eating, record everything and get some data that you can then look back on and work from. If you think to yourself, wow, there's no way that I'm eating, 3,000 calories a day. This app must be wrong. I've tried all of this before. Go and record everything that you eat for a week and actually see, because often, Monday to Friday, you might be fine. But then when you get to the weekend, you have a few glasses of wine or a couple of beers on the Friday. You go out for breakfast with some friends on the Saturday. Perhaps you get a takeaway for dinner as well. And then on the Sunday, maybe you go and visit your family and there's a big lunch put on and you eat quite heavily there. And before you know it, you've eaten 4,000 calories on both of those days. Yet in the week, you're only eating 2,000. And that's where the discrepancy will come from. So spend a bit of time focusing on your calories and it will give you a framework that you can then go into the next sections with. For our macronutrients, now this is basically the three food groups, I suppose, that like those nutrients inside a calorie fall into. So you've got protein, carbohydrates, and fats. Fats aren't bad. There are good fats and there are bad fats, but that's probably a topic for another video. Everyone needs an element of fat in their diet. Things like seeds, nuts, oily fish, some meats, dairy, all of that stuff has good fat in it, eggs as well. And when we're eating those types of food, in moderation, of course, they give our body some pretty essential building blocks to go from. The same with carbohydrates, really. They're our energy source. They're what fuel our day. Oats and whole grain breads, pasta, all of that kind of stuff is your carbohydrates. And again, focusing on those probably whole food varieties are going to do more for your health than just consuming the cheap white stuff that you get from the supermarket. Protein. Now, this is probably the most important one when it comes to building muscle and getting your health dialed in. As a general recommendation, I would say somewhere between 0.75 and 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. So say you weigh 200 pounds, I would suggest eating somewhere in the region of 175 to 200 grams of protein per day. And that's going to give you a really good base to build that muscle off, to keep your body repairing itself as you do some of this exercise over here. And then we come on to the micronutrients, which are as essential as the rest of it. Because if you're not getting all of the right micronutrients in your diet by eating a nice, varied and balanced, healthy diet, then effectively you're gonna limit yourself into how healthy you can be. If you think about like a bucket of water and imagine each of the micronutrients, so things like your zinc, all of your vitamins, iron, that kind of stuff, all of them form a plank around this bucket. And you can only fill the bucket up as much as those planks cover. And if one of your micronutrients is really, really low, it's basically going to make a hole in that bucket and all of the water is going to pour out. And that's what happens to us when we have micronutrient deficiencies. We can only build so much muscle, we can only build so much health if all of these are in check. Now, my recommendations when it comes to micronutrients would be to take, at the very least, a vitamin D supplement. Especially if you live in the Northern Hemisphere and in winter, most of us don't get enough vitamin D. So taking a good vitamin D supplement would be top of my recommendations there. Zinc as well can be a really handy one, just for helping our general testosterone production and immunity. And finally, omega-3, which is like a fatty acid that our body doesn't naturally produce, and we need it for a lot of processes within the body. So you get it from things like oily fish normally, but most of us don't eat enough of that to get as much of the omega-3 as we need. So I would recommend supplementing with that. And most good multivitamins will have some vitamin D and zinc in, and then you can just get a separate omega-3 supplement to have on the side. And those will really form a great backbone along with the rest of your diet. I like to take most of my food, probably 80% of my diet, from good whole food. So things like fruit and vegetables. As I've said before, those whole grain, wholemeal breads and pastas and stuff like that. Meat, dairy, seeds, nuts, that kind of thing. But then 20% of my diet probably looks like pizza and chips and beer, because I think one of the real fundamental things with health is that it needs to be a balance. You don't want to be so militant on health that it takes away all the enjoyment from the rest of your life. You're trying to get healthy and to grow into a healthier version of yourself, to enjoy life more, to have a happier, more fulfilling existence. So by being too regimented and too restrictive, unless you're like trying to get in shape for a bodybuilding show or something and you have a real specific goal, I think an 80-20 split on your diet of pretty healthy stuff 80% of the time, and then if you want to go and have a McDonald's once a week, that's fine. It's great. Crack on, do whatever suits you really. So when we combine this diet and exercise element, we get quite a holistic and comprehensive idea of what a healthy lifestyle might look like. Personally, I like to resistance train a couple of times a week. I like to go for a walk a couple of times a week, and I like to do a bit of yoga a couple of times a week. And maybe I'll take one rest day in that. Now, if you're new to exercise or improving your health in general, then that's not the point to start at, trying to do stuff 6 days a week. I would actually strip it right the way back and just do 5 minutes of whatever the most accessible one of these is to you, whatever you feel like you need the most. So maybe if you're really stiff and struggling with, you always get back pain and hip pain or leg pain, start with some flexibility and just do like 5 minutes of stretching a day. Take a day off once a week and build it up from there. You don't need to go 0 to 100 straight away. In fact, I would hazard a guess that this could be where you are currently. You see, maybe you wanted to get healthy a while ago and you had some really good motivation to start with and you made a bit of progress, but you ended up burning yourself out because you tried to do too much. And so you dropped off a cliff. Almost actually probably under where you were previously, under that baseline. And then a little while later, you get another little burst of motivation and then it drops off. And again, you go around in this perpetual cycle. And you don't really make any progress. You may ask how I know that. Well, it's because I've been through that journey myself several times. And I know it can be really, really frustrating. So I'm trying to help you out and get you onto this path here. Today could be marked for you by this little star here. You see, that's where you are currently, and that's where you could be by the end of this video. You get that little burst of motivation again, but actually we're going to start to build some really consistent habits and do things in a way that help you to build sustainably and consistently. So that, you're still going to get those little spikes of motivation and then fall off a little bit and up and down, up and down, up and down. But the trend is upwards rather than flatlining over time. So that's where we want to get to. That's what we want to implement. And so just by starting with 5 minutes of exercise per day, that's going to be a really, really great way to get on that future you graph here. And when it comes to diet, I would suggest the same as well. Don't focus on fixing everything in your diet all at once. For me, I think probably focusing on your fruit and vegetable intake is one of the easiest, quickest and simplest fixes you can do. There's something about eating more fruit and vegetables that switches something in your mind to say, oh, I'm making healthier choices, I'm giving my body what it needs. And so I like to start there. Trying to eat 5 a day, 5 portions of fruits and vegetables a day is really, really going to benefit you. And even if that seems like a long way off at the moment, start consistently eating 1 vegetable or fruit a day, then 2 portions, then 3 portions, and just build it up over time until you're hitting 5 portions a day on average. And that is also really going to help you with your micronutrients down here. You see, getting those fruits and vegetables, they're so full of vitamins that it helps to balance out that leaky bucket, the illustration that I spoke about earlier, and you're going to start feeling your health just skyrocket, really. And as I mentioned, making those healthier choices leads to a slightly different self-image. you see, you start to view yourself as a healthier person. And over time, that self-image changes. And it all comes down to your mindset. And this is something that I feel is missed so often when we come to looking at health. Because often health and fitness is perpetuated as this, we must get to the destination as quickly as possible. I must get as lean as I can as quickly as possible. I must put on as much muscle as I can as quickly as possible. I must be able to lift as much weight as I can as quickly as possible. All of these things, it's an all-in mindset. It's an all or nothing. I've got to do this. I've got to do this, and I've got to do it as quickly as possible. And I've found over time that cycle, that mindset leads to this graph down here. We get that burst of motivation thinking, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to crush it. And then reality sets in about a week later and we fall off. What we actually want is, rather than having an all or nothing mindset, we want to have a mindset of just consistently building over time, compounding those gains each and every day. Even if you're only doing 5 minutes of exercise per day and eating your 5 a day, that's really going to make some changes. If you aren't moving at all at the moment and you're not eating any fruit or veg, you're going to make changes. You're going to notice differences. So the self-image really, I think, can be split into 2 types of personality. We can either be failure types, where we look at the world through a lens of failure. Everything that we seem to do doesn't work out. Life never goes my way. I can't do this. I can't. Those type of people are the ones that never make any progress, because as soon as they come up against any form of resistance, any form of difficulty, they quit, they give up. But I would imagine, as you've sat through, 22 minutes of this video at this point, that you are probably a success type. You've got what it takes. You look at the world and think, right, I can improve, I can learn, I can do this. The very fact that you've sat through 20 minutes of this video so far tells me all I need to know. Most people will have left by now, but those select few of you who are still watching, you're in this camp because you want to change, and you know that you need to learn and to grow and to develop to get through that. And it's going to be difficult. There are going to be challenges. There's information that you don't know. There's lots of stuff about exercise and diet that you probably don't know. But you've got to start somewhere, and you're taking those steps right now. So you fall into this camp. And it's important that you keep that mindset going forward. This journey isn't, as we've seen down here, it isn't a straight road. There are going to be ups and downs. But if you can keep yourself in that mindset, in that positive space where you believe that you can do it, then you will. As I've sort of alluded to here with the change cycles, and down here, we do go through changes from time to time in life. We enter new periods of our life. I got married this year, and that was last year, and that was a change of pace and rhythm and how things were done for me, and my life had to adapt around that a little bit. You may be changing jobs, or perhaps starting a family, going off to university. It could be any of those things. But when we come up against those life events and things start to change, that's often where we can start to lose momentum or fall off because of that change. That's what we want to avoid. We want to have built a sustainable foundation in our lives that's just of things that we just do because they become habits. Over here on the exercise, if you just get into the habit of doing that 5 minutes of exercise a day, and over time, adapt your diet to include, say, 5 portions of fruits and veg, it just almost becomes something you do automatically, and you don't really even have to think about it anymore. I wake up in the morning and think, right, I'm up, I need to move my body a bit. I'll do some stretches or some push-ups or something to get me going. For breakfast, I'll have a bowl of Greek yogurt with, some kiwi, blueberries, maybe some raspberries in there. So I've done 3 portions of fruit before I've really even started my day. And then, it just becomes built in to the system that we want. That's what we're trying to create here. Health, rather than just being a list of stuff to do, it needs to become a system in your life and something that you build your life around. But some of us, myself included, will have limiting beliefs. Those beliefs may not, they may not put you in the failure type camp where you just think, everything is rubbish, everything is negative. But you may have blockers in your mind that stop you from doing certain things. Take exercise, for example. You may have never really done exercise before. You may have never stepped foot in a gym. And so you have this limiting belief in your head that, if I was to go to a gym, then everyone is going to stare at me. Everyone's going to, think like, what are they doing there? They don't know what they're doing. And so I'm not going to start that. It's too, that's not for me. But actually, that's just a limiting belief in your mind that doesn't really exist. Everybody at some point is new to the gym. And most people who go to the gym are actually really friendly and helpful. If they see someone who's new struggling with something, often they'll come over and take them under their wing. They'll show them how to do those exercises because it's something they're passionate about, it's something that they enjoy, and teaching someone new to, get them into enjoying that same activity is actually really, really quite a nice thing for them. So that limiting belief in our mind needs to be dispelled. And to do that, we have to first identify what the blocker is. And so you may already know what they are. Quite often they're fairly obvious, but it may be a bit deeper rooted for you. And I find that journaling actually can be a really useful way of identifying some of these blockers. So we want to identify them. And then we want to imagine. So let's take that gym example again. If you've got the limiting belief that everyone's going to be staring at you when you first go into the gym and making fun of you, you start to imagine scenarios in your head. You start to imagine how it's going to feel, and you draw on past experiences, past emotions of perhaps a time when you felt embarrassed, and you start to glue that to this imaginary situation in your mind. And before you know it, you've kind of spiraled and you've gone off a cliff. And you've got this little story in your head that you've imagined of how it's going to be. But we can actually reverse that pretty easily too. All you have to do is to imagine in reverse. So rather than imagining what, the worst possible thing that could happen, imagine the best possible thing that could happen. Imagine walking into that gym and starting to do some exercises and, feeling good, feeling confident. Perhaps you imagine that someone comes over and gives you a helping hand. They're really friendly, they're really nice, and you make a new connection with somebody. And again, you've taken this experience, and perhaps you've had a situation in the past where you've had a really positive experience with something new, and you can just glue that into this new imaginary version of this situation that's going on in the gym. And so we can use our mind and our imagination to almost turn some of those limiting beliefs on their head by, rather than imagining the worst that could possibly happen, we start to imagine the best that could possibly happen and use that as our default instead. And then we have to incorporate it. We can imagine all we like, but unless we actually go and do the thing that we've identified this limiting belief we hold about ourselves, but unless we actually go and take action on that, then all of the imagining really is a bit pointless. And we'll come on to taking action shortly. I just want to wrap up the mindset section though with a point on habits. You see, health, I think, really just boils down to a balance of good and bad habits. We all have good habits, we all have bad habits, but it's, kind of how we structure those and how we balance them in our lives. There are certain habits that really don't do you a lot of good, whatever you're doing. Bad sleep is one of them. One of the extras up here is sleep, that I'll talk about shortly as well. And a good habit could be, exercising, dialing in with your diet. It's about getting a balance. And habits for health, to me, aren't all about diet and exercise. That's just one element, that's our physical health. We actually need to look at a more holistic picture of health. In general, we need to look at our physical, yes, but also our mental health, our emotional health, our spiritual health, and our financial health too. All of those, they all form a part of the picture. And physical health is just sort of one fragment of that. Now, if you don't really know where to start with building some good positive habits in your life, or perhaps you just don't really understand how to build those consistently, then I've put together a 10-week program. It's linked in the description. It's called The Reset. And it's going to help you to, kind of get out of this area down here where you start something, burn out, start something, burn out, start something, burn out. And it's going to transfer into being able to build these small, consistent habits, these little daily wins. And I'll walk with you through some exercises, through some things you can do for your mental health, your emotional health, your spiritual health. And just really, it's going to help to lift your health journey to the next level. So if that sounds of interest, as I say, check out the link in the description. And then coming on to consistency that we've just kind of touched on. To me, doing something is better than doing nothing. Done is better than perfect. So let's say, you've looked at your diet, for example, and you've seen, I need to be eating at like 2,000 calories to lose the weight that I want. And you have a day where maybe you go over that. Maybe you eat 2,200 calories. Yeah, you haven't been perfect that day. But rather than going, I've missed my calorie goal today, so I might as well have a bit of pizza as well. Stop there. Say to yourself, well, it's not perfect, but I've at least made an effort. I've still eaten 500 calories less than I usually would, even though I've gone a bit over my target. Or perhaps in the exercise category, it could be, you've started a weight training program and you feel that you need to be in the gym 3 times a week and for, say, an hour each time. But one day you've only got perhaps 45 minutes, you're really tired, you feel a bit under the weather, and you're debating whether to go or not. Go, because you will get, even if it's not a perfect session, even if you only do half of what you intended to do, you've still done something. Done is better than perfect. It will still be a little compounding chip on your upward journey. So that's really my approach to mindset. It's something that I feel is quite essential, to be honest, to the success of your journey. If you're still here, as I said, you're probably on that success type personality, but just tweaking a few of those limiting beliefs or building some better habits is really going to take you to the next level. A few extras, honourable mentions really, in terms of our health, our sleep, rest and hydration. And again, these are things that are really going to be fundamental in your overall health and well-being, not just your physical health, but your mental health and your emotional health and spiritual health too. Sleep and rest, I'll kind of bundle them together. your body does need time to switch off. It needs time to rebuild, to heal. And sleep is one of the most valuable ways, most efficient, effective ways we can do that. Aiming for 8 hours of good quality sleep per night should be up there on, a goal really to have if you're looking to improve your health. All of this work that we do in the gym or running or whatever, that's not going to pay off as well. It's not going to give you the results you're looking for if you're not getting the sleep to rest and repair from that. And rest as well is quite important. And this is actually something we dive really deep into on the Reset course, because many of us have a bit of a broken relationship with rest. I think it's perpetuated by the hustle culture that we see so much these days, that we should always be on, we should always be doing. And that's just not the case at all. Actually, we need that space to rest, to decompress, and to do the things that we enjoy doing in life, to really make our life feel worth living. And to me, rest is a huge part of health 101. Hydration as well is another thing I'll just cover quickly. Again, something that we touch on in that Reset course in a bit more detail, but hydration is, the counterbalance really to diet. If we are dehydrated constantly, we're not going to have the energy levels we need to do the exercise. We're not going to be processing our food as well in the diet section. And actually it can really, it can be pretty detrimental to our mind as well. We start to get brain fog. I don't know what a brain fog is, but it's not what I was thinking of. Anyway, it can be detrimental to our mental clarity as well as our physical health too. So, as I say, hopefully, if you're in the novice, apprentice, maybe getting up towards adept, you've been at this for a few years trying to improve your health. This video has given you a bit of a framework and perhaps a few pointers as to where to advance yourself, where to grow, the things that you need to. I hope it's been of help. And finally, I just want to say down here, where should I start? What is today's action step? I think, to me, the most important thing that you can take away from this video is that doing something small each day is the way forward. So whether that's starting with a bit of exercise, just 5 minutes, starting with eating maybe a few more portions of fruit and veg today than you usually do, or maybe you do a little bit of work over here in the mindset space and you start to identify some of your limiting beliefs, perhaps have a look at some of the habits you're doing in your life. Take action today, make a small step after this video, perhaps even just drop and do some push-ups if you can, or go for a short 5-minute walk. It's going to give you that little bit of motivation, that little bit of uptick to get you started on that future you journey. Thanks ever so much for watching until the end. I hope you found this valuable. If you want to find out a bit more and have a bit more of a structured guide and walkthrough with me, then do check out the Reset course linked in the description. There's also a free blueprint in there as well that expands on some of the stuff we've covered today in a little bit more detail too. Take care and God bless.